Welcome back to Modded Kerbal Space Program Career Save. In the last episode, we built a little science jet plane to fly around the immediate Kerbin area and land in a couple of biomes just to collect enough science so that we could add a CO2 scrubber to our command pod. And this should enable us to be able to perform our crewed orbit of the moon contract. We've also added, you can see, a monoprop oxygen fuel cell. And that's going to be an emergency power supply if we need to have power on board for life support, but we don't have solar and our batteries run dead. And you can see I've added a small tank of oxygen to feed that monoprop oxygen fuel cell. Of course, there's barely any monoprop on here, just 10 contained in this pod. It's a very short-term fuel supply. I think we're ready to launch this mission. I think all we needed was to add a CO2 scrubber. So let's face east and go to the launch pad. Okay. Data experiments on. SAS on, throttle up. Displays on. Ignition. I should mention, by the way, that I did unlock a couple of more science nodes, so we're low on science now. I was considering using a dual command pod so that 2 Kerbals could get the experiments from this mission, but I just couldn't quite unlock quite enough objects to make it work. So we've got dual command pods unlocked and a couple of other things, and after the science gained from this mission, we should be able to start launching 2 Kerbals at a time for missions like this. But just so you know, there will be less science than you remember next time we see how much science we have, and more nodes unlocked. We're going to bring apoapsis up to 80 or 85 is fine. Cut engines. Let's ditch the launch escape system. That thing was fast. Okay, nearing apoapsis. Let's point prograde. In fact, I probably time warped a little too much there. We're pretty close. So let's point prograde and light these engines up. We're going to pull periapsis above 0, but we want to drop the stage before that happens. It shouldn't be a problem because we're going to run out of fuel. Stage. If we hadn't run out of fuel, I would have just cut the engine and dropped that stage before periapsis passed 0, because I want to drop it to where it'll crash into the ground instead of become debris. Okay, we're in a stable orbit. Now let's plan an encounter with the moon. Moon set as target, roughly here. So you could aim for a free return trajectory, where it'll bring us back to Kerbin without needing any fuel. However, I'm not going to do that because I want to get into the low space biome at Moon, and that particular trajectory doesn't give me free return. So this looks pretty good. That'll get us down to about 30 kilometers. I might adjust that a little bit lower before we get there. But I want to make sure we get the low space biome for science. Burn time 55 seconds. That means we want to start burning when the node is about 30 seconds out. So let's stop time warp. Point the nose towards the maneuver vector. Light engines. Now, if you wanted to, you would plan your encounter for the moon during this arc right here, where the moon is inside the magnetosphere. Because the magnetosphere protects you from the solar wind, and therefore your Kerbals get less radiation inside the magnetosphere. However, I don't have lifetime radiation turned on, so it's not going to be an issue. They can withstand solar wind radiation for the short period of time this mission's going to take, and then they will be healed. I'm saying they, but it's just Jeb, or just Val. She will be healed when she gets back to the Space Center. Let's call that good enough. Let me see what that actually looks like when we get there. Yeah, that looks perfect, actually. Have we ever done Mystery Goo? Yeah, space low. We have not done Mystery Goo space high at Kerbin. So we can start our Mystery Goo experiment right now. The material study. I think we're going to do that in Moon space high biome. Space low, I think, is technically more science, but we won't be in space low long enough to complete the experiment. We will be in space high long enough to complete the experiment, so that's why I'm going to go for space high instead of space low. We'll get space low on a future mission. Here's a question. Is our contract to orbit? Yes, it's to orbit, so we need to capture at least into a minimal orbit here. So let's put a maneuver node here, and that'll be a retrograde burn. That's enough to do it. How much delta V do we have? 714. Okay, forget everything I just said, because we've got plenty of delta V. We're going to pull ourselves into a low orbit, and then we'll run the materials experiment in space low, because if we're orbiting, we've got time to do it. That'll net us more science. Looks like we just completed that contract for science data from space around the moon. Mystery Goo is now complete here. Let's have Val get out. Do not let go of the ladder. You still don't have a jetpack, but we can do EVA report here. Okay, let's just time warp down to, well, I guess to the node. Interesting consequence that we were originally planning sort of a gravity break encounter, but decided to change to an orbital encounter. We're going to be orbiting in the retrograde direction. Burn time 15 seconds, node in 1 minute. Let's point the nose at the maneuver vector, which is the blue marker. We are now in orbit of the moon. How do we keep ending up in like the worst possible orientation, just by complete coincidence? I don't know. Okay. Let's have Val... Well, let's time warp first to get the crew report done. Now Val can hop out again. Don't let go of the ladder, but do an EVA report. You can see we're exposed to moderate radiation because we're outside of the magnetosphere. We can check on this tab, Val's health. She has received 2% of her allowed radiation so far, so we should be in good shape here. Let's board. Let's time warp until Mystery Goo completes. And now let's trigger material study. Out of electric charge. And see, that is a problem because that means the CO2 scrubber isn't running right now. But now that we have solar again, we have electric charge back. But if that was going to be a problem for longer than just a few minutes, that's when we would use the monoprop fuel cell that we built into our pod. Material study complete. So that means we have, 1 material study sample and 3 goo samples. That means both of those experiments are depleted. Let's have Val hop out. Don't let go of the ladder. Always remind yourself. But take the data from those 2 things. And now we just need to get back to Kerbin. So if we're in a retrograde orbit, we would want to do that actually basically where we're at right now. Let's point prograde. There's the prograde vector marker. Light engines. Bring PE down to like, I was going to say 45, 42 works for me. Let's time warp down. You got to be careful time warping on highly elliptical orbits because you go a heck of a lot faster down here than you do out here. We've still got 160 delta V in the tanks. We'll use that to slow down, but it's not enough for us to actually capture into a low orbit and plan our landing location. So we're just going to let it land wherever it lands. We have entered the atmosphere. Let's point retrograde. Retrograde vector right here. Let's burn the rest of the fuel out of the tanks. There we go. It looks like Trajectories mod is telling us we're going to pass through the atmosphere once, and then we'll be on this orbit, and then we'll descend on that one. Do you think these parts will survive this pass through the atmosphere? I'm going to find out. I'm not going to eject them. Oh. Bad decision. That's what they call F around and find out. I just wanted to see if my parts down here would survive that pass through the atmosphere, but the aerodynamic drag made me turn around where I wasn't protected by the heat shield anymore. Thankfully, it was okay. I think we're actually going to go in. Yeah, we're going to go in on this orbit. We're not going to get back into above the atmosphere. We have now decelerated. It'll soon be safe to deploy the drogue chute, but we're not going to do it yet. I'm going to drop the drogue chute. Main chute. And we have Splashdown. Recover vessel. World's first milestone, return from flyby of the moon, return home from orbit of the moon. Contract complete, return from orbit of the moon. Next time, we've got a couple of contracts we could look at. I know we can do the same thing, flyby of Minmus. We could also, we've probably got enough science now that we could start thinking about landing on Moon and Minmus with crewed missions. We could definitely do it with probes and return home, and we have contracts for that. We'll have to think about which one of those things we want to do next. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.